Hey friends, and welcome back to the Rewind podcast of Forward Church. Join us each week as we take a look back on Sunday's message and dig a little deeper into the conversations with those who are teaching across our sites at Forward. We want to invite you to be part of the conversation too. So if something we're talking about on Sunday morning sparks a question in you, head to our website, forwardchurch.ca/ask us, and submit your questions there. And we're going to do our best to engage with those questions in this space. With that said, let's jump in and get started.
Well, hello and welcome to the Rewind podcast. I'm here on the podcast today with Pastor Daryl, who was preaching in Kitchener, and myself. I was preaching in Cambridge this week, and we were talking about kindness this week, Daryl.
Yeah.
But you started your conversation about kindness reminiscing about high school.
Mm-hmm. I did.
And I want to ask you this question as we get going. You think about high school, you think about like kind of different groups and cliques or types of people in high school. What group of people would Daryl have felt most at home with in high school?
Oh, what group of people?
Yeah, like was there would you have affiliated yourself with a particular grouping?
Yeah, you know, on Sunday I talked about the football crowd, and Derek, believe it or not, that was not the group I hung out with. I know. It's shocking. It's shocking.
I thought you were telling a story about your own personal football playing experience.
Yeah, you know, quarterback. No, it's not the case. In high school, you know what? My first year of high school, grade 9, I was hanging out with a group of guys that were into heavy metal and making really bad decisions, and that was the group I hung out with.
I wish everybody could see Keith's face right now as he records this.
There's a lot of fist fights. There's a lot of.
This is not the picture that I was expecting either.
Is this what you were expecting?
Great.
Yes, that was my first year, and on the last day of school, me and my good friend Jeremy, we're still good buddies. We looked at each other like, "What are we doing? Let's make a change." Last day, right? Last day, right? Because you gotta wait till the last day to make the change.
This is the last day of grade 9, though.
Last day of grade 9.
So you got a lot of years in front of you here.
And we walked across. We were walking together, and we were hanging on the hallway. Last day of school, and in our school, all the corridors were labeled. They all had like A corridor, B corridor. Really creative, right? So we went down to J corridor, and we're like, "Hey, let's hang out here next year, J corridor for Jesus."
Oh my goodness.
So the next year, we just started hanging out in J corridor, and we just sat down, and we're like, "This is the spot." And then our friend Matt came, and he's like, "This is the spot." So then all that year, people started hanging out, and it just became the spot where all the Christians at the school started hanging out with.
So
and then it kept on growing.
We've moved from fist fighting, heavy metal, Daryl making bad decisions to J hallway, Jesus Club, Daryl.
Jesus Club, Daryl. That was us. There was Christian Club at the school, and we said no, we don't like that. Okay. We're just gonna ban that. We're not gonna do that. We're just gonna hang out in J corridor, and everyone is welcomed and accepted. Okay. And it just kept on growing and growing until around the corner. Then you could go to L corridor. You don't want to be there though. That's like leftovers. J corridor. It was awesome. It was really cool. People from all different churches were talking about like Jesus and like theology and decisions and all these things. It was a wild time, really cool.
Hello, it was very cool, and it was a wild time as we sat in the Jesus corridor and discussed theology.
No, it's about like inviting your friends and like inviting them to like discover Jesus. Yep. That's what this all was about, of like living it out.
Okay. Yeah. And you saw people coming in.
Yeah, and we saw people coming to Christ.
Awesome.
We saw like all these awesome things happen during that time. And then at the end of that year, we graduated, but there was all these other people who like weren't in our year.
Yeah.
And then that was it. It was done. I talked with someone else who was a year behind me, like, "Hey, how's it going now?" And they're like, "It's done." And so apparently our group was the group that held it together.
Oh, man.
And as soon as we graduated, it got shut down, and the school renamed all the hallways after our last year. So no longer J Corridor is gone. They called it something else. They gave them all like, I don't know, animal names or something probably lame. But J Corridor ended in our final year, which is really sad.
This is not. I was hoping for a more uplifting end to this.
Sorry. Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. Like, to me,
really
that was
Daryl, and then we just end in this deflating note.
But to me, it was like this.
The Holy Spirit left
the Holy Spirit moving in during this season.
Hey.
And hey, like that next group after us had to figure it out themselves. What are they going to do next? But it was clearly a decision that was made amongst the people who were there that we're going to make this a thing.
Okay.
And it wasn't just this is just a spot where people hang out. But that was
your group.
That was my group.
Group.
That was us.
Daryl in high school.
Missional living, though we wouldn't have used that language at all. And that was my first year. Or sorry, that was the transition that happened after the first year.
Yeah, it was year 10 through the end.
Oh yeah, great times. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go. Is that what you expected out of my?
It's a little bit more, definitely more than I expected. The heavy metal bad decisions getting into fist fights, Daryl.
Yeah. But
okay, I think you made a good decision in choosing to leave that behind at the end of grade 9 and enter down a different road.
Yeah. I do just want to clarify. We were in on the joke that J Corridor was about as cheesy as it could possibly.
Okay.
Just to clarify that.
Make it better.
Just to clarify that, like it was not lost on us.
It was pretty corny.
No, it was definitely not lost on us.
It's better when I understand that there is a certain irony to it that you were in on the joke.
Your high school career, I assume that you're a big fan of football, so you probably were hanging out with the football crowd.
Yeah, I would say I was. I floated around. I had some really good friends who we were really tight, and they went to youth ministry with me. So they were my tightest, closest friends. But I bumped around and through most of the social groups in high school with relative ease. So yeah, whether it was the jocks or whether it was the student leadership crew, I would say probably the one area that I never fit at all, nor did I have any desire to fit, was the arts and drama and band crew. That just was not my scene. Mm-hmm. But I was never involved in throwing anybody in a locker who was part of that group. I only witnessed it on occasional times.
All right.
So it was like the rooting for me was having the 3 or 4 core guys around me who loved Jesus, and we were walking through figuring out all of high school together as Christians. Obviously, didn't always do that perfectly, but I'm really thankful for the crew of guys that I had around me to walk together in that what can be a challenging time as you try and figure out identity. And something I think that high school, at least during the time I was in high school, I recognize I'm very old now, but a word that would not have been associated with high school frequently is kindness.
That is fair.
You would concur with that? So as we talk about kindness, it's kind of ironic that we start out in high school. I think I can look back and say, although I was probably a nice kid, I wasn't a kind kid. And we spent, both of us in our message, some time unpacking that difference between kindness and niceness. And I was wondering, as we think about kindness, is there any aspect of kindness that you wished in your message you could have had a little bit more time, or that you would have talked about a little bit more? I personally felt really like I got into this. I was cutting stuff like crazy by the time I got to the end, because I was like, I could do a full 3 weeks on kindness here. I don't know how you felt, or whether there were some things that you were thinking about with kindness that you really didn't get to talk about a lot.
Yeah. I definitely felt the same way. because this is a topic that, there's a lot in there that we could unpack. I think looking back on it, part of the kindness that I could have spent a lot more time on was exactly how we experience the kindness of God. And part of that kindness, which is a kindness that that often we don't feel is the kindness of God, where He is calling us to hard things and to submit to His will for our lives, which often doesn't feel like kindness.
Sure.
But we need to receive it as that. And I cut this part out of my message, and part of it is I keep on going back to this scene in my mind of love Lord of the Rings, the movies and the books.
Yep.
And I'm currently re-listening again to audiobook of
You're
Lord of the
listening.
Rings.
You told me Andy Serkis has done the audiobooks and narrates all the pieces. Who plays Gollum, for those uncultured swine who don't realize and know that the greatest trilogy of movies ever made, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. No, he does a great job at narrating it. Which his narration of this scene and in the book, it's slightly different than the movie, but I have a picture in my mind, the movie, where they're in Bilbo's house and Gandalf is trying to convince him to leave the ring behind. And Bilbo doesn't want to leave it behind. He gets this, he's been wrestling through it and he's like, no, I'm going to take it. And then Gandalf gets kind of mad at him.
Yeah, and in the movie, he gets big, right?
Yeah, you see him.
You see him grow in stature and authority.
Yeah, and he says to him, like, you have to let it go. And then his voice changes. And he's like, I'm not trying to rob you.
Yeah.
And it's this beautiful scene of how
I think he says, I'm not trying to rob you. I'm trying to help you.
Yeah.
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 And he does. He gets really kind.
Yeah.
Because he starts,
It's a
Bilbo Baggins. He gets really big and it just shifts and he comes down.
Yeah. And I think it's a beautiful picture of what God does for us is sometimes we'll see what God is doing in our lives and we're like, wow, why can't He be more kind to me and just let me make my own decisions in my life? But actually, when the gospel confronts us, it is actually a great kindness. And we need to receive it as that. And the more that we push against it, I think the more that we will feel like we're under God's judgment, but instead what He's really trying to do is lead us out of darkness and into the light. He wants to lead us from death into life. Yeah. It is the greatest kindness that He could possibly give to us by, as the passage we're looking at, is through the cross, what Christ accomplished for us and the forgiveness He gives to us. But do we always receive it that way? And that's the thing I feel like we could really just drill down into. And it's something that we need to remind ourselves constantly about is how it is good and loving and kind of what He is doing as He corrects us in our actions, or even when our minds lead us down paths that just simply aren't true and are actually against the will of God. It's a better thing. And I in talking especially with people who aren't followers of Christ, I get like that wrestling of like, how can that be good? How can that be kind? Because the whole world is set up to is designed right now that the personal decision that you make is the best decision for you. Like that's the path forward. And I'm trying to, whenever I get the opportunity to talk with someone who's not a believer, trying to point out like this doesn't work out. This leads actually to many, many problems in our lives.
Yeah, I think about in John 3, I've actually had people tell me, well, hey, Jesus didn't come into the world to condemn the world. Doesn't Jesus say that Himself? Mm-hmm. And absolutely He says that. But the reason He says that is because He also says, because the world's already condemned. Mm. So now He's coming to tell them about the reality that they are condemned, but they don't have to be. Hmm. But our world, you're right, wants to believe that the idea that Jesus didn't come into the world to condemn the world means He came in the world to affirm the world, right? Yeah. That's a very different thing.
Yeah.
And we could get into a long conversation about what does it mean to accept somebody versus what does it mean to affirm somebody versus what does tolerance mean, right?
Yeah.
And where does kindness fit into all of those things?
I think that there's an aspect of kindness. I kind of touched on this in the message about kindness being countercultural.
Yep.
I kind of feel like
I wanted
there's
to talk to you about that. So yeah, let's chat about being.
Yeah.
Dive into it.
Yeah, so I kind of feel like there are two different perspectives on kindness right now. So there are those who, for the most part, have seen kindness as weakness, and so you don't be kind to your enemies, but instead you need to be victorious over your enemies.
Sure.
You need to crush them. So you don't try to understand your political opponent. You have to crush your political opponent. And I mentioned this on Sunday, and I'll dive into a little bit more. Like there's something actually in our political system we need to understand. Like you can't, if you're the leader of the conservatives, you can't say to the leader of the liberals, hey, that's a good point. Oh, I never thought of that.
Right.
It's a system where you actually can't say that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like you'll be condemned within your own party.
Right.
And this isn't like for any particular party. Like all parties operate under these rules. And years ago, I had a conversation with a guy who was pretty high up in a certain party. Like he was way up there in leadership. And he talked about he eventually had to leave because he couldn't handle the hypocrisy that he saw. Because when the cameras were off, they were best friends. Talking about like, hey,
Right. I've heard that many times.
How are your kids doing?
Yeah.
Oh, great. And then guys, cameras on, 3, 2, 1, and then they'll just go right back to like, and that's why you're an idiot. And he just was watching this. He's like, as a Christian, I don't think I can be involved in any of this anymore.
Right. With integrity.
With integrity.
Yeah.
He's like, why can't we have that level of civil discourse?
Right.
But anyways, so like there's this one side, like you got to crush your enemies. And then this other side of kindness, which is embrace to the point of you can say and do and believe anything. It's all on the table.
Yep.
I'll never say you made a bad decision.
Right. Because that would hurt somebody's feelings.
It would hurt their feelings. It's even more than that. It's this kindness is just affirming whoever you already are.
Yeah.
And you get to decide who you are and what your future is going to be. And it's just when you just 100%, you just affirm it.
Yeah.
And that's the best form of kindness. And my worry is when we talk about kindness, it's hard to define because we just see those two extremes on either side. So anyway, what are your thoughts on that?
Tim Keller wrote about the fact that in culture previously, we understood that part of the role of community was to help to shape and give us identity. And that in modern culture, community has been about the job of community is to affirm the identity that I choose. And just in just unpacking some of the ways that what we expect of the community around us has changed radically in our identity.
Why do you think that shift has happened?
I think because both are actually not where we need to root our identity. So when one thing doesn't work and isn't working, then we go to the next thing. And eventually, and this is why I love history, eventually you see things cycle around. Because what we're actually meant to find our identity in is in Christ. We're meant to root our identity in who we are as image bearers of God and as those who have been redeemed by Jesus, for Christians in particular, right? And so neither of the other two ways of identity are satisfactory, but there's a special burden that comes from telling people that they have to figure out their identity and then putting a burden on the community that everybody has to affirm the identity that they have chosen, which always seems to be in flux because the burden on the individual is that's a weight that nobody is really meant to carry. The existential reality of you having to figure out the entirety of who you are and what you're about and what value you have and what value you bring to the world is a heavy weight to put on somebody. But then it's also an unrealistic expectation that then everybody should constantly shift to you in whatever you have decided your identity is in this moment, in this season. And that the world should kind of revolve around what the identity is that you have chosen for yourself, right? It creates all sorts of struggles and conflicts in culture.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's something in my message I talked about a book by Frank Bruni, the Age of Grievance, where he talked about like the things that need to happen in culture for us to even get to this point. Which kind of goes to what you're talking about of, we're going to see cycles of going around different ideas coming back again. But it's not just merely that. Like there's something that has to happen in our world for that even to happen, for us to land where we're at right now, as he's talking about this issue of we seem to struggle in the West right now to distinguish between large and small grievances. We just see them all as an issue, and what that means is then we just see everyone as our enemy.
Right.
And it actually takes away our capacity to truly show love and kindness to those around us. And so that to me is always a really fascinating question of like what needs to happen around us to get to the point where we land right now. But always bringing it back to, hey, like what is the gospel? What does Christ point us to? Which will be a much stronger foundation than the world around us that continues to change and shape. And I'm sure if we have this, go back to this topic 20 years from now, we're going to have a totally different culture in which we'll be examining and talking about, where have we landed in the area of kindness.
Yeah, and I think we can agree. We can look at all sorts of areas in culture where kindness is very countercultural, whether that's politics. That's just such an obvious one that's in our face. But I would say even just in our general interactions in culture with other human beings, there's a decreasing lack of kindness. I don't know if you'd agree with that or not. And I know myself, kindness can be a struggle. So I wanted to ask you, Daryl, if there's an area where you struggle, or maybe a group of people that you struggle to be kind to, or situations where you find it really hard to be kind. So for example, like for me, I can deal with a lot of stuff that comes at me and still be kind to somebody, I think, in response. But man, if somebody goes after my kids or my family, I have a hard time being kind. I think there's a lot of situations in life that I'm pretty it's less hard. I think it's always a bit of work to choose kindness, but it's especially work for me to choose kindness when I'm driving my car. So I'm just wondering if there's any areas in life where you just would identify and say, you know what, like kindness is a bit of it's hard for me in this spot.
Yeah. I think that, and in some ways, maybe this is a little counterintuitive. I think the areas where I tend to struggle in showing kindness is in areas of life where I've already wrestled through it and have come to my own conclusion. But if someone else hasn't landed where I've landed,
right?
I seem to struggle more in kindness in that area because I've already thought through that thing, whether it's in an area of theology or politics or whatever it is, some decision that needs to be made. I've already wrestled through it.
And these would be people who haven't really wrestled with the issue at all that you struggle with, or people who have wrestled and landed in a different spot.
Landed somewhere else, but I've already wrestled through it. I'm like, well, how could you do that?
Right.
How could you land somewhere else in this area?
And could you have come to a different conclusion when it's so obvious that I landed in the right spot?
And the reason why I say I feel like this is counterintuitive, because in many ways, like if I was to take a step back, I'd be like, I can see how you took a left when I took a right. I could see how you examined the data and you were unconvinced by it, and so you thought of a different solution. Like I could see this, like so. Like I'll give a clearer example. I grew up in a very conservative fundamentalist Baptist church.
Yep.
That saw the KJV
Yep.
as the only translation of the Bible that you can read.
Authorized version.
And then and along with that, you can only sing worship songs out of the hymnal.
Right.
And they held both. I just had a conversation with someone about that today.
Right.
That they, like, to them, the hymnal was that was it.
Right.
Like, that's the only book you can sing from.
Inspired
Yeah.
music given to us once for all time.
Yes. And so as I was telling someone this morning, I have a collection of hymnals in my office now.
Yeah.
Partially as evidence against this, that every church seems to have a different hymnal.
Right.
And they're all slightly different in some songs.
Well, one of them's right. You just have to figure out which one.
The one that has your church name embroidered on it, is that the right one?
Keith will tell you which one's the right
perfect. All right. Anyway, so I had to wrestle through this from a really young age of like, okay, is there only one translation of the Bible that's it?
Right.
And is there only one songbook that you can possibly ever sing out of? And I had to wrestle. And if you guys are wondering where I landed, I'll just tell you, I'm at Forward. So obviously I didn't land where those other churches did. And if you're wondering where Forward, anyways, if you're watching this, you know where Forward landed. And so,
okay, we'll get to those in 1 second here.
But then if I encounter someone who is KJV only,
Yeah,
I struggle with kindness there,
Right.
because I'm like, well, how could you still agree with that idea? Don't we have enough evidence against it? And so again, I feel like it's counterintuitive, and I have to, in my best, healthiest moments, I'm quick to catch that. Be like, wait a second, I know how easy it is to fall into this, but we're not always in our best, healthiest moments.
this is where I think the link between in Ephesians 4:32 talks about compassion and kindness, and I think this is where the link between compassion and kindness comes in. It is really hard to be kind to someone whom you have not first had compassion and empathy towards, where you haven't put yourself into a spot where you understand, okay, that could be me. Mm-hmm. I can see how I would get there, and this. We'll come back around to this because I want to get to the YouTube questions here. But this is why I think the more we understand the kindness of God towards us on the cross, the more we can understand the extent of the kindness that was shown to us, the more we have the capacity and ability to then be kind to others. And our failure to do so shows that we fail to understand just how kind God has had to be towards us. Because you just said it, like, when I can take a step back, when I can put myself in their shoes and think about my own process and journey of how I got to A instead of B, then I get how they got there. But when we can't put ourselves in a place where we could in any way see ourselves in the shoes of an individual and how they would ever get to a point where they made the choice that they made, it is impossible for us in many ways to show kindness. I'll give you one quick example before we get to our YouTube questions. Before I became a parent, and I heard about stories about parents who had ended up with babies with shaken baby syndrome, I thought, who could ever get to a point with a baby that you would lose control in such a way that you would just shake them because you just wanted them to stop? We had our second child cried every night, screamed for like 4 hours plus, inconsolable. And after 4 or 5 months of that,
the thing, in part of that compassion and kindness is to understand it, and yet you don't have to affirm that,
right?
Like, and I think like your example there of with the baby. Like, that's so easy for us to see. Like, yeah, I can understand, but you're not affirming that.
No, you don't say, well, that's okay. No harm, no foul. Like,
everyone gets that.
What? How can you blame them?
We with our firstborn, he just cried for the first year.
Yeah.
And it drove us a little crazy. And yes, like you can understand it, but it doesn't mean you have to affirm it in any way. But I think it's, that's part of the process in having that compassion. But
Hey,
we got some questions.
We got some YouTube questions. So, Keith, what are they?
First one here is from Jen, and wanted to know if you could talk about kindness and love as mentioned in 1 Corinthians 13. Would you say that if someone is not kind, maybe they don't understand very well what love is?
Yeah, I think I actually would agree with that statement. I think kindness is, as the apostle is unfolding love, he's using all of these descriptors to it's kind of like a diamond, right? Looking in through all these different angles to help us understand what real love is. And all of these are angles, aspects that help us come to a fully orbed understanding of what true love looks like. And kindness is an aspect of that. And when we fail to act in kind ways, we fail to love. I think that's a very fair thing to say. Doesn't mean that we don't love, and this is where love gets really complicated, right? But it means that we fail to love, and I would argue it probably means that in that moment we are revealing that there is a deeper love in our heart than the individual that we are being called to love, and that's why we're struggling to be kind. Anything you want to add into that, Daryl?
Yeah, I just was thinking about is kindness a form of love?
I think it's love in action. I would say in a lot of ways it's love in action.
Well, I was thinking of, is kindness when you are loving someone who is imperfect? Is there an imperfection in there? Like do you, because I don't know if I could construct that sentence or that idea the other way around of, can you show kindness to someone who who is perfect?
Right. No, I think you're bang on.
So we can't show, so we can love God, but we can't show
kindness to God. No, I think that's fair.
But we're imperfect, so God can show kindness to us. Yeah. And when we recognize other people's imperfections, we can show kindness to them. But I feel like you can't switch around of, if you're going to marry someone because you love them, but you can't say I'm marrying you because it's the kind thing to do. Then the other person will be like, I don't know if I want to accept that ring. I don't know if I want to.
The other person will also one day wake up and think, yeah, it wasn't that much kindness to me that you married me.
So I feel like, but in our relationship with God, but he's the only one who is perfect.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just trying to wrestle through this. Like how does love and kindness and imperfection work?
I think you're definitely, you cannot show kindness is something, again, like grace, that is unearned. Mm-hmm. I mentioned on Sunday, if you are kind towards someone who has been kind to you, that's called not being a jerk. Mm-hmm. Right? You're just reciprocating what you've already received. Real kindness is when you're forced into a situation where somebody has done something and kindness is not what they have deserved, and yet it's what you offer to them. Otherwise, you're just giving what you've got, and no one actually views. We don't actually talk about that as kindness. Politeness, maybe, but not kindness.
So I'm trying to think through, like, if you show kindness to someone, like that's one expression of love, but eventually you can get to the point where your care for them is no longer just merely kindness.
Right.
And I was thinking of God's love for us. Is it purely kindness that he is showing to us? Or it seems like it goes deeper than that's just a part of his. It is absolutely
part of his love. Again, the Hebrew word that is often, depending on your version, translated kindness especially when used with God and his character, is hesed. Some will translate it his faithful love, sometimes his kind love, or just his kindness. So all of that is in the nature of God's love itself. It is a love that endures even when we act in ways that don't deserve love, and that's why it is also a kind love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There was another question there, Keith?
There's a second one here. Yes. What does Christ-centered kindness look like in extreme situations?
Yeah.
For example, someone breaks into your home
Yep.
and threatens you or your family with physical violence.
Yep.
My former church took an extreme stance on pacifism to the point of discouraging self-defense when being physically attacked. I would love to hear your perspective on this. Thanks.
You want to take a stab at that first, Daryl? This is an open question, by the way. I think you likely were in a church that was an Anabaptist tradition, and that would be a consistent theology of pacifism that would be rooted in Christ's teaching in the Sermon on the Mount to turn the other cheek. There is a consistency, and I understand where that comes from. Would that be where you would land in what kindness looks like? Is there ever a time where self-defense would be permitted in the life of a Christian, and yet you'd still be kind?
Yeah, I think that I can certainly understand where some people can land in that theology. However, this is my pushback against it. So I think that it is actually not a kindness to allow someone to sin.
Right.
It is not a kindness to allow someone to commit injustice.
Yep.
And so there are times where we need to intervene, and sometimes strongly so, to prevent that from happening. And so that person breaks into your house and they're going to steal all your stuff. A kindness to them might be, hey, I'm going to stop you. I'm going to physically jump in there and stop you from doing this, because that would be wrong for you to do this. And so there are times where we need to make sure that we are responding to that. It is not kindness to someone, if you're in an abusive relationship, to allow them to continue to abuse you.
Yeah.
That is actually heaping more and more sin and judgment upon themselves. Yeah. And so part of the kindness there is actually to say, hey, I'm not going to allow this to happen ever again. And so unfortunately, we fall into this trap of thinking that the kind thing to do is just to let certain things happen. But again, we see in Scripture, like God confronts us. He wants us to change. God confronted sin at the cross. Yeah. In a brutal manner. He took on sin and death to conquer it, out of his great love and kindness towards us. And so I think that there certainly are these opportunities, these times where we do need to take action. There's a lot of nuance in that, and that's where I think the Mennonite Anabaptist theology comes into play of why there are certain denominations that are against serving in the military. So there's a lot of nuance in all of that they would apply to this, but I think that every Mennonite or Anabaptist I know of would certainly say there are extreme circumstances where no, you need to stand up, you need to intervene.
I have met some people who would be full pacifist to no exceptions. My question is to them often is, how is it kind to fail to step into the middle between somebody who is about to harm somebody else? How are you showing kindness to the person who's about to be victimized and abused? Mm-hmm. Right? I think there are times where you have to intervene in a situation out of kindness, not only for the perpetrator, but for the person they're about to commit injustice against.
I was in a conversation where that same scenario came up, And the person who was trying to argue for extreme pacifism, his response was he would jump in the middle and he would allow the injustice or abuse to happen to himself,
Sure.
not towards the other person. However, what that does is it boils down this injustice to purely a physical act, but it actually is a spiritual issue for the person perpetrating it.
Right.
And so that's why I'm like, it's not enough to just allow it to happen to you. You actually need to, the person who's doing it, there's something internal that's happening inside there that needs to be addressed.
Sure. But also, as soon as they've got through you, you're done. Now the person is still there.
Yes.
So now you've just allowed them to victimize two people.
Yes. But again, you're heaping judgment upon that person.
I agree.
And that's where, it's like my son, he's 5. There are times where I need to redirect his energy for his own good. Like he needs, if he's getting wound up, I'm like, hey, you got to calm down. It's not just a matter of I don't want you to break a toy or something. It's like it's for your own good.
Yep.
You need to change what you're doing right now. And it's great because now as he's getting older, he's 5, he's getting it more.
Yeah.
He's understanding it. So just the other day, he's like, oh, I was getting kind of amped up, but I calmed myself down, just took a moment and just had to, change what I was doing. Like, that's great. Like you're learning, like you're figuring this out. And that's part of why we intervene, knowing that it's for that person's good, not just in the actions, but also internally what's going on inside of them.
Yeah, there's a big difference between, I would argue, between defending yourself, defending others, and taking vengeance upon, I hope that was at least a bit of a helpful conversation. I think that this ties in well to, maybe we'll kind of start to bring it to an end here. I talked about the fact that oftentimes being kind requires us to have hard conversations. We've talked a little bit about this thus far, but what I've also seen is this be used as an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
To excuse what is quite obviously unkind words, unkind behavior. And do you have any thoughts as to how we can kind of be honest with ourselves, check our hearts when we go into having hard conversations to make sure that the intent behind those hard conversations is not to grind somebody down. It is not to go in and be intentionally unkind. Like there are certain even segments of the church right now that don't like words like that actively push back against words like winsome, which I find puzzling. Because it seems very scriptural to me, and yet they would no. Sometimes we have to say hard things to people. We have to be really firm, and I don't disagree with that. I think there is a danger of falling back into not wanting to say hard things because you're actually being cowardice. But I think there's an equal danger to saying, well, I'm just being kind, even though everybody around you looks at you and says, no, you're just being a jerk.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I think this is the part of the message that actually I struggled to wrap my head around of how to communicate it well on Sunday morning, and I'll do my best now to address it. But in line with what you're saying there, that within the church, this has been a struggle of how do we stand for truth, but yet be kind. There's an author. Speaker, his name's Preston Sprinkle. He came out with a book a few years ago that's dealing with some issues in the LGBTQ community. And the title of the book and what he talks about, the title of the book is A People to Be Loved. Mm-hmm. And he really felt convicted through a conversation, as he explains it, with someone who's in that community struggling with, well, how do I show love to this person? And yet I know the way in which they're living their lives is not God honoring. And it just led him down this path of writing this book and being heavily involved in this area of ministry. And I as what you're saying there's these times it seems where that's something that we've struggled with as Christians, of how do we show like true, genuine love to people that we disagree with. And I think that is vitally important, that we wrestle through that, that we still stand for truth, and yet we're still able to be kind and compassionate to those around us. But anyways,
I think one of the questions I asked myself, and I have to really give the Holy Spirit permission to just ask him to show me my heart in this. But one of the questions I always want to ask when I enter into a conversation where I know it's going to be a hard thing is like, who is this actually for? Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, it's easy for me to go into a conversation, a hard conversation at times, and it's really, if I'm really honest, it's about me. It might be because I'm frustrated and angry and I just want to take this person to task. If that's where my heart is at in that place, it doesn't usually end up well. Mm-hmm. I could come into a conversation and say some things that are true and that are hard, but it's really about making me feel better about myself. That's another motivation that could come in. Mm-hmm. But when I go into a hard conversation, and I can honestly look and say, you know what, like, before the Lord, the reason I'm having this hard conversation is 100% because I love this person. Mm-hmm. And I know they may not receive it as love, but kindness is not always received as kindness. If Jesus is God, which he is, then he was always kind. But I guarantee you there were times where his opponents did not receive the things he said as kindness. Mm-hmm. And yet there's no doubt in my mind that he is kind. So what came from him was coming out of a heart of kindness. And ultimately, no one can know your heart except you and God. And you can be very self-deceived about your heart. So it's really wise to ask God to be truthful with you about your heart, to ask the Holy Spirit to reveal your heart to you. But for me, it's just so critical. Like, I have to ask myself before this conversation, before the words leave my mouth, if I know they're going to be received by somebody in a way that's going to cause hurt, it is even more crucial for me to be really honest and say, okay, but is this because I love this person, and because I love them so much, I can't not say this hurtful thing.
Yeah.
I know it's going to cause them hurt. Because if I'm honest, man, there are lots of times where I've said hard things and justified them afterwards. But it really was, I'm venting, I'm angry, or this makes me feel a little bit better about myself because it's put this person in their place, which is just a little below me, or maybe a long ways below me. Yeah.
And I think that part of the diagnostic in all of that is your heart. If you're going to confront someone, is your heart truly grieved over what is happening right now?
Right.
And I think that in our current discourse in the world right now, I don't hear a lot of grieved hearts over actions that are happening, things that are going on in the world, and I think that's vitally important in truly loving those around us. I mentioned an article on Christianity Today by Russell Moore. He was talking about the devastation that the U.S. is facing right now. They just got hit by a hurricane last week, and Derek and I, we were talking about another one coming.
Next one coming here in the next 36 hours.
And Russell Moore, he walked through in this article of people choosing to take this moment right now to say, hey, like this is what happens when you vote the wrong way.
Yeah.
Or people being upset, pointing to it, and this is why religion is bad. And he ends the article by saying, hey, this is not what this is not what tragedies should teach us. Instead, our primary thing we first need to take away is it points us to loving others, actually loving those people who are firsthand experiencing this, that should be our first response is love and care for them, and not do we have the right policies in place. I don't know if that's the most loving response in that moment right now. And so our hearts should be grieved, but I know we talked about this earlier of we need to be grieved, but then like when does the time for action come into place? When do you say, I love this person, I'm gonna be kind to them, but when do you get to that point where you say, now we need to make a change though, now an action needs to shift in your life? How do we respond?
Yeah. Again, I think this takes, it's not a one size fits all on this. But there does have to be a time where we stop this. If we want to use the American example again, I think every American would say they are so sick and tired after every shooting that takes place. Thoughts and prayers. We're sending out our thoughts and prayers. Mm-hmm. Because over time, if thoughts and prayers never turn into a discussion about, okay, well, but how do we actually keep this from happening next time? Mm-hmm. Then it's a meaningless gesture, or it's an emoting, right? And yet, also, the time to jump into the policy discussion is not while children are still being put into the ground in graves. Because it gets politicized and used in such a way that you forget that there are mourning parents and a mourning community on the ground who just need someone to love them and care for them, put their arm around them. You have to have both.
Yeah.
You have to have compassion and kindness. Mm-hmm. Because that's what Jesus had towards us. I just love, you look in scripture and there's a number of times where it says Jesus looked and he had compassion on the crowd. But then ultimately that compassion leads to action. Most fully, it leads to the action that Jesus takes on the cross.
So the amazing thing in the gospel then is that I think what the people dislike about what you just said there about, jumping into policy too quickly is that then you just become another statistic.
Yeah.
And no one wants to be a statistic.
No
one wants to just be another piece of ammunition in some battle.
Yeah.
God never looks at us as statistics, and yet he knows us intimately. He knows exactly who we are, and he loves us right where we're at right now. And so that's a huge difference of what Christ does for us, though he takes action.
Yeah. The way you show kindness and compassion is by always making sure that the orientation of your heart is towards others first. The timeline on that may look different in different circumstances, how we move through the care and the emotion of the moment to the action that needs to take place. But I think as long as we have an orientation of our heart that says, I'm going to put this person first. First, I'm going to put them first in getting past my own awkwardness and desire to not be a part of the hurt and pain that's going on and just get through that and get over it. And then I'm going to put them first by continuing to enter in and see how we can seek a way forward that brings better outcomes and brings justice. Then I think you're going to be in a good spot to find the right balance of compassion and kindness. Anything you want to say as we come here to a close, Daryl?
Yeah, if I can circle it back to my high school experience.
Yeah.
Which I know we all want. I was thinking about in that experience in high school, kind of joking about, a bunch of us church kids taking over this hallway. The cool thing that ended up happening time and time again was we had people join us. We were hanging out there. We always hung out there like before school or during the lunch break. The really cool thing that kept on happening was we had people in the school who would say, hey, I don't know where I belong.
Right.
Can I just hang out with you guys? And there was always room for those people to come. Like, yeah, absolutely.
Always room in hallway J.
Always room hallway J. Doesn't matter what music you're into.
Until there isn't
what's
in
going
your
on.
hallway L.
Well, yeah, I mean, you got to get there first. So, but that was just this amazing thing of people. I don't know where else I belong, but can I join you guys? Whether you are wearing a football jersey or on student council or into punk rock or whatever you are, like, yeah, like, come join us. That's more than okay. And I so loved that this felt like a safe place for people, no matter who they were, to come and have that space. And as we talk about kindness, as we think about who we are as people, as families, and as a church, do the people who are outside of your church network, do they view you as that safe person or that safe family, that they know that they would receive kindness and love no matter what's going on in their lives? And I say that thinking about myself, like, have I made that clear enough in my words and my actions, that the people around me truly know that and feel that? And my hope is that as a church, that is really what we will continue to embody. I know that we already have started that, but I want us to just continue to hold that as a real priority for us as a church family.
Yeah, I think that's great, Daryl. I'll close it off with this. That's the power for that comes in understanding that's exactly the posture Jesus has taken towards us. Mm-hmm. He took us in. He takes us in. Maybe you're listening today and you're like, is there a spot for me with Jesus? I mean, with the way I am, with the things that I've done? And the answer to that is absolutely. That's the kindness of God that leads us to repentance. That God is so good and gracious towards us. He opens his arms towards us. He runs towards us in the middle of all of who we are and what we've done. Doesn't matter what it is. And yet the kindness of God extends to the fact that he doesn't leave us there. That he takes us, he changes us, he transforms us. Not always easy. Oftentimes it's very difficult as God is at work in us, sanctifying us and transforming us. But it is always his kindness to do it and to move us towards Christ-likeness. That's what we've been talking about through this whole series. And so I ended up in my message by talking about the fact that that kindness is cross-shaped, and I think that is the power of the cross to lead us towards the type of kindness that invites people in, like Daryl's talked about. Thanks for joining us in this conversation, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.